the way that we do thought disproving class is I welcome any, thoughts that feel like limiting beliefs for you, or just anything that feels like a problem. We're going to deliberately disprove it. This is not to gaslight anybody, because there are two truths here. So one truth is what you're experiencing is very real, and the feelings are very real and valid. The feelings are never not valid, but they're often based on our interpretation of something, which may be at different levels of truth. So there can be relative truth, relative reality, and then there can be something, who are any of us to claim we have absolute reality and we know, right? But what we want to do is we're going to do this together. So I don't have all the answers. I've been doing this for many years, so I can get us started, but there might be times I was like, I don't know how to disprove that. Somebody help me. So I'm going to give an example. Okay. So I was teaching this in a place I used to work at a few years ago. And one of my colleagues said, okay, disprove I have a headache. I said, okay. When you say the sentence, I have a headache, you're implying I have a headache and that is bad, right? Isn't that the inherent, the problem is said with that sentence? And so I told her, well, yeah, that's valid and you feel that right now, but you're saying I have a headache and that's a problem. And so the "and that's a problem" part is the thing that we're going to try to disprove. So the thing is, we don't ever know the long-term consequence of something that we are doing until far later. And we often don't know the meaning of certain events in our lives until the end of our lives. I can say, oh, that was bad that I went through all these things. But now it's like, oh, well, now I understand the meaning of it. And when you go through something, you're able to meet people where they're at. If you've experienced something similar to that, you can literally meet them. You can't read something and help somebody with this unless you've gone through something or many things like that. Anyway, I just want to give that background. So when I disprove this thought, I have a headache and that's bad, it could be like, okay, well, you have a headache. And then maybe you ask, maybe this colleague asks some random guy if he has a Tylenol or if he's got some natural pain medicine. And then what if that ends up being her husband? Like that's how they meet. They fall in love, right? Or, so it's like there's so many things that can happen based on an event. We actually don't know if anything is good or bad in the moment that it happens. There are people who have overslept and they missed their plane. They had to go to work that way and they thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired, right? And then the plane goes down. Like how many people have been on the news where that's happened? And so we actually don't know. There's a amazing story I want to tell everyone. Maybe you've already seen it on one of my videos, but this is, it gives me like goosebumps every time. But there is a story of these two farmers. So the first farmer has a son, the second farmer does not. The second farmer always felt like he missed out in life, and he would tell the first farmer very honestly, very sincerely, you have a son, he can help with the harvest. I have nobody, you're so lucky. Now, the first farmer is very wise, and he would say, maybe so. I don't know if I'm lucky. And then the son, he did help with the harvest. And the second farmer comes up to the first, see, you're so lucky. He helped you. Yeah, maybe I'm lucky. I don't know. Then the son was riding a horse, fell down, and he broke his leg. And the second farmer comes up to the first and he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. How unlucky that this happened. And again, the first farmer's like, maybe it's unlucky. I don't know. Then a couple months later, the army comes through and recruits all the able-bodied young men from their village that leave the son behind. And then the second farmer comes up to the first and says, oh, how lucky that your son broke his leg. And the story supposedly goes on forever, right? Because we don't know the overall meaning, the long-term consequences, and we don't know the opportunity cost of like if something didn't happen. So maybe, like for example, the plane example, right? It feels like, oh, I could get fired, but oh, I saved my life, and I didn't even know. Maybe that person never found out the plane went down, but their life was saved. So there are a lot of things like that that can happen. So you see what I've done here? We're not gaslighting, we're still validating the experience, and we are trying to see it from a higher vantage point. The higher the vantage point you can see something from, usually almost every single time. I've never ever heard of a time where this is not the case. There's less suffering. So yes, this experience is valid when it happens down here, but this is first tier 2. The one who is suffering, it's the ego. So when I see from a higher vantage point, there's less ego and there's less suffering. I have more perspective with which to frame it with. And we don't have to do it in that spiritual way right now for people who don't want to, and the people who do, let's do it. So let's be really flexible with this for what you need. And so you might say something and I might try to disprove it. And I want you to say, yeah, Nina, but what about this? I want you to expose every single thought that you have that limits you from feeling okay about something. Now, this does not mean I'm going to be complacent and I'm going to stay in an abusive situation because I can disprove. No, we're not going to use this to bypass feeling our feelings. And we're not going to use it to renounce our responsibility, to take care of ourselves and basic things like this. We're only going to use it in ways that free us. So any questions initially so far? And it's going to also become more clear as we go along. If there's no questions, does anyone want to shoot? And if you don't want it to be even personal, maybe it's a friend, maybe you want to do it anonymously. What if someone were to say blah, blah, blah? Frame it however you feel safe saying it. So what I'm doing, everyone, is I'm giving him feedback that's different from the feedback. And I'm not making stuff up. Okay. If I did not believe what I just said, I'm not going to say it. I'm not trying to BS somebody. I'm not trying to just give someone false hope and put them on a precarious ground where then they fall. I think it's a disservice to BS somebody and then they have a false way of looking at something, a delusion. We're trying to get rid of the delusions. So I just want to give you that feedback, since we're always more critical of ourselves than other people are of us. And so that you can see what a person outside of you, how they perceive your voice. So I'll get it rolling that way. And I'd love to hear if anyone else has feedback. But how do you feel now? So now you check in how you're feeling. And even if what we said makes sense or it doesn't, you can say, yeah, but what about this? Or no, I'm not totally convinced. In the introductory video I had everyone watch with the 3 boxes of the trauma flow chart. So if I believe a thought, it creates an emotion. And so he's asking, if I didn't have that thought, how would I feel? How would my body feel? And so you can imagine, how would my experience be if I didn't have it? Because a lot of emotions are created in real time by believing thoughts. Then you don't have to feel, oh, I'm just BSing so much and I'm talking so much. You'd be obligated to feel it. Is that right? So you've created a belief around, or maybe even identity around, people who use their voice. Let's pause just for a moment, because I want to make sure we address all the things you're listing so we don't lose them. So can you give me an example of maybe 1 to 3 people you know who use their voice but are not oppressors? Maybe people who are advocates for other people? I started thinking about this in terms of getting a glimpse and seeing that I am not that. So oftentimes if I buy into something and then I'm feeling it, it can feel like this is totally the absolute end all be all reality. And then if I don't think that, I say, how would I feel if I didn't think that? It gives me a glimpse of how literally that thought is creating suffering. Now, I don't want to end there. I don't want to use that as a bypass, but there's a few things. One is thinking, well, is what I'm thinking even true? If something's not even true, then is it worth feeling through something unnecessarily? Okay, so if I think that I'm so upset because the sky is green, and I'm so upset about that, and then I realize the truth is the sky is blue, do I then need to feel through the pain I have around thinking the sky is green if I no longer think that anymore? Now, that's different than if I have a stored emotion from trauma or from previous thoughts and misinterpretations that caused emotions that were then stored in the body. And those must be felt through. If an emotion is stored in the body, then I can't bypass that. Okay, as I see something in a more true way, and I'm not doing and thinking so much with my mind, a lot of stuff will naturally come off of me. So you actually could do that. That's not bypassing, but I do have to feel. I'm obligated to feel. So, okay, to summarize what I said, because I know it could sound confusing. So I like to do this in a way to first see that it's not me. I get a glimpse of what it's like without that experience, without those thoughts, so that I can see something, a truth beyond my experience in the moment. Then I would like to disprove thoughts that are not true, because I want to go towards truth. And I don't want to experience unnecessary suffering caused by the thoughts that are being created, or the emotions that are being created by these thoughts. And then finally, the emotions that are already stored in my body, I do need to feel those through. So I'm not going to try to convince myself of anything to try to bypass feeling, but I still want to disprove limiting delusional thoughts. I want to still go towards the truth. That will increase the window through which these stored emotions can pass through. So that might be really complicated if this is the very first time you've come across some of this stuff. So don't worry if you don't understand it. It'll be in the recording that you can go over it later. All right, you guys remember this from the video? I've made it way more complicated than the video, but the boxes are very similar. So thoughts, when we believe them, they create emotions. We are working on exactly this hack right here, which is to disprove the thoughts and to not buy into them. When we do the experiential sessions, we are here and here. So this is where I have the emotions, or the emotions have been stored in my body, and I need to feel through those emotions to work on them and accept them and feel them till they pass through. So what you're saying is totally valid. And I think you're talking about like what would work on first, or individually, if your issue is more thinking, you'd come here. But that's what the experiential classes are, to teach us these methods, these hacks. And then this class is to teach us this hack and this one, which is an identification with the thoughts or a believing thoughts. So we're going to disprove thoughts, or we're going to disprove identifying with thoughts or identities. So that's absolutely true. And in my experience, everything you've just said, but I think that's extremely high level. That's actually where this practice goes. It literally goes to not paying attention to thoughts. So that's absolutely right. For those of us who are still suffering with thoughts, that's where we can question them to render them powerless in the creating of emotions. But if we're not identified them, like it's not even taking them seriously, he just knows that they're chatter. It's not even at the point where it's creating an emotion when we see it for what it is. So he doesn't have to worry about it too much. But for those of us who are buying in, which is 99% of people, I would say, we want to question it. And then the thought starts to feel like chatter once we've done that. Does that make sense? Or does anyone have any questions? So notice, everyone, how that one really seemed to hit. I'm going to ask you to confirm, but you know, we can say different things, but it's got to be the few that actually land with the person. He's like, oh yeah, what did you think? Did that one land with you more than the others? The meaning we make out of something. So when I add meaning to a primary experience, and instead of just feeling through that primary experience, you know, I'm adding layers that block me from it. But I'm also creating emotion in real time if I make meaning out of something. So it goes in both directions. Byron Katie's method, off the top of my head, 4 questions. Is that thought true? Is it really true? Who would I be without that thought? And some sort of turnaround. That is an awesome method, Byron Katie's method. And the method I'm doing right now is like, let's be as creative as possible for seeing outside of the tunnel vision of believing one thought. The mind thinks, well, if I look a certain way, then I will be happier, that I will have more positive. And it's still trying to get something from the external, you know, so that I can feel a different way internally. And what's really cool with this work is we can literally go direct. And so we can actually go direct and feel through what's bothering us. And then we can just be at peace and accept so much of what's happening. And if the mind realized, well, I'm trying to hedge bets here. I'm trying to like, okay, if I can change something about my appearance, then maybe I can get this, this, and this. But all of those are in a very precarious position. There's no solidity in anything that anyone can give me or anything I could ever get from the outside. But if I can learn how to go directly inside and be at peace, then then the mind doesn't realize it can be at peace that way by questioning its assumptions and beliefs about things that are that are unable to give peace. Welcoming a thought can help with if there's aversion or resistance to the thought, but if you're welcoming it while also buying into it, it's not going to be helpful in ultimately like freeing you. But if were you able to do it without buying into it? Is it uncomfortable because you don't know who you would be without the thought? Like, what would be remaining? If those aren't my thoughts, then who am I? If I'm not the one thinking these thoughts, who am I? I'm so glad you said this, because that's something I've been working with lately, is like, who is the one who is thinking this thought? Like, who is the identity of that 6-year-old who's, and then where are the associated feelings that are there? And I've been working with these somatically, but as identities. And then you're right. We don't want to, oh, well, you're just wrong. Like, we're not trying to do that. We need to meet these identities somatically. We're going to do that in tier 2 this weekend. But we want to meet them and see this identity and let them be seen. We don't have to think of it as seeing the young self, but we could think of it, I mean, sort of, we can think of it, but the actual practical application will be to actually observe the physical sensations that arise as we ask, who is the one? And then allowing that to be seen with our objective or kind and loving attention until it dissolves. And then identity can often dissolve in that way, as well as the associated feelings, but not because we're trying to get rid of them, but because they received being witnessed. That 6-year-old wants to be loved and witnessed. And that's what we can do with our present attention. That's the goal, what he said. So I guess it's good for us to have in mind what the goal can be if that resonates for you. And then there are parts that where we're buying in, where based on a misinterpretation in childhood, like that person said something about me and then that was me, and then that feels foundational, or things where that's stored in. And so do you guys know Rupert Spira? I know a few of you are aware of him, but he's a teacher. I'm going to post this video in the group. This is my favorite video of him ever. He talks about how we can intellectually know something, but that felt sense of identity is actually has a stronger hold on us somatically than even our thinking sense of identity. And so we need to meet it. What I've been doing is meeting it somatically as if it's real, like giving it the acknowledgement and attention it needs. And then once we meet it and see it all the way through, and then it no longer exists, then a part of us can see that it was actually never real to begin with. But I think we have to meet it in that way, and then we might have a different vantage point. What do you guys think? I'm curious, when you have a certain thought, is it that a somatic felt sense arises for you simultaneously with that, like with the 6-year-old self? I think we need to acknowledge that and meet that at the nervous system level. Just in my experience with trauma, especially, they talk about this in spirituality and trauma. They talk about how spirituality can often bypass trauma in some ways. There are teachers that talk about that. So I think in cases like this, it's really important that we meet it somatically and at the nervous system level to free a person. That might be the route, before we have access to another route. Does anyone have any closing remarks for today? And if you ever can't make like the next thought disproving class, you can put your thought down and under the Q&A post in Patreon, like, hey, everyone, can you disprove this for me? And then we'll put it in the recording. You can watch it in the recording later. Great, everyone. Thanks for all, that you brought to this. This is a group effort, trying to free ourselves from some of these limiting thoughts.